Hi everyone, you are watching a record of the Lightning Talks event that was hosted by Effective Altruism Anywhere. And during this event, our community members gave talks about topics they are interested in or passionate about. I'm really excited because it's an opportunity to learn more from each other and know each other better. As you're watching this record, you can use time codes down below to navigate between the talks. And you can find a document in the description with all the links that were mentioned during the talks. And yeah, our first speaker is Alex Barnes, and I'm giving the word to him.
Anywhere who set this up a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now. Amazing, amazing stuff. Yeah, so today I am going to talk about systems and complexity in EA via supply chains, mental health, and entrepreneurship. So yeah, we've got 10 minutes, so it should be easy to fit all that in. So yeah, first thing, so supply chains. So how might supply chains apply to something in EA? So for example, global health. So I'm gonna make this an interactive session. So I'm probably gonna call on people and pick you out if I don't get volunteers. So who would like to talk about supply chains and global health and development? Any volunteers? All right, let's start out with our
in which ways?
Oh, Daniel, yes, great.
Yeah.
So what's, yes, so global health and development, you're familiar with the concept, right?
With supply chains a bit less, but global health, yeah.
Yeah, so what's like an example of something in EA that's like global health or development?
I mean, just randomized control experiments, right? To see how effective malaria nets are.
Of what?
I mean, you know, in terms of saving lives, right? You want to calculate the DALI and so on.
Okay, so let's say you do that, and let's say you're like, oh, this thing saves lives. Now what do you do? That's it? You just like, you publish the thing, and then we're good. We saved lives because we wrote a study, and it says we saved lives.
Right. I mean, you know, you have this issue of cluelessness, right? That you don't know about the long-term consequences of your actions.
Sure. So let's say somehow magically you do, and you're like, oh, this is an amazing thing to do. Saves lives, great term. Now what do? Do I just publish that? I write up to the EA forum, and I'm like, hey, I'm good. I wrote it on the EA forum. Someone's going to do it. It's going to save lives.
Well, you have to market it a bit better, right?
Okay.
So you have to use it. Yeah.
So let's say I market it, and everyone's like, yeah, totally, go do it. Go do it. Daniel, you're in charge. What is the intervention you're doing, Daniel? What is it? What's the thing that's going to save lives?
I mean, just intervention which you find the most cost effective.
Okay, and what's the one you think might be the most cost effective based on?
In global health?
Yeah.
I guess one of the give a well charity.
Okay, and we'll pick one. Anyone's good.
IMF.
Okay, yes. Against Malaria Foundation does what?
Yeah. It does give anti-malaria nets to poor families in.
Awesome.
Logistics.
So, okay. How do you get anti-malaria nets to Burundi?
Yeah, you have to execute the delivery quite well.
Okay, so how do you do it? What's the steps involved?
I'm not sure if they have plans in Africa, but I guess you would, look at the supply chain. So first, from the producer till the consumer. Okay.
Do you know anybody who works in supply chain logistics?
I guess you.
Yeah, there you go. Good answer. Yes. So I know people in supply chain logistics. I was at Supply Chain Canada the other day. There's tons of people working in this field. Not many in EA though. But if you want to actually get bed nets to the people, you need to, exactly like Daniel said, you need to manufacture them somewhere. You need to bring them to the port because they're not going to be manufactured locally. You have to get them from the port locally into the country, and then from the country, you have to get them distributed to the individual who need them. So like absolutely 100%, all these things are right in terms of qualities and all this sort of stuff, but then actually saving the lives depends on the supply chain and logistics to get the materials to the right people at the right time. Logistics is all about, right place, right time, right material, so on and so forth. Okay, great. So that was global health and development. Next one, animal welfare and supply chains. Who wants to tackle that one? Anybody love animals? Not in the food way, but like to save them, keep them alive, sentient beings and stuff. Kendra, you came off. You turned your camera on. You're going to go for this one?
Okay.
Yes.
If we are trying to support cultured meat, we need ways to get that manufactured and to people.
Yes, and cultured meat is what? Because I don't actually know.
Oh, pop quiz. Meat built from actual cells rather than from animals.
Ah, perfect. Okay, so let's say I talk counterfactual ventures into relocating to Guelph, Ontario, here in Canada, which has a huge agriculture and food program. So this is a possibility, and I'm going to talk to counterfactual ventures and try to convince them of this. I'd love your help if anybody wants to help. That'd be amazing. If they relocate there and we figure this out and we can create the meat in a lab or whatever it is you do with cultured meat, then the next step is we get Maple Leaf Foods involved, one of Canada's biggest food processors, who's already doing some stuff with a mixture of meat and whatever you call it, fake meat, whatever, better market it better than that. And then we could work with them and figure out, okay, how do you get this out to all the grocery stores, in Canada, like Sobeys, and all the way across the States with like Trader Joe's or whatever people shop in the States. I don't know what you shop at. And then everywhere else, and like England, Tesco's, and then wherever else around the world. So yeah, absolutely. If we can get the cultured meat thing figured out, cool. We then need to manufacture and distribute it and get it out to actual human beings who are going to eat that instead of killing lots and lots of animals. So that would be good. Call on Daniel about X risk and supply chains. And I think, Daniel, you know exactly what the answer to this one is.
Is there more than one Daniel?
That's so the other Daniel,
yes.
the Daniel who's talking about, here's the spoiler, nuclear security. So if you're there, maybe you'll cover it when you get to your talk. So supply chains and nuclear security, pretty obvious. Don't let bad people get their hands on fissile material. How do you do that? Supply chain controls, import controls, scanning for radioactive fissile material, a bunch of other really, really smart stuff that Daniel knows that I have no idea about, but I'm sure he'll talk about that at some point, either today or some point in the future. So that was supply chain. Okay, awesome. So that supply chain is a great example of systems and complexity because supply chain has inventory. And anytime you have inventory, you have a complex system because do you have enough inventory? Do you have too much inventory? Do you have the right inventory? Has it expired? So on and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into managing that. So if I'll just go to share my screen now, so I can figure that out. All right, here we go. Now, hopefully you guys can see that. Everybody see that okay? All right, so this is the event we're running on November 23rd. Daniel Yu from SokaWatch is going to talk about African logistics. Daniel runs a company. He built it. He's the founder, CEO of a company that does distribution from warehouse to retail. So he doesn't deal with end consumers, but it's warehouse to retail in Africa. So this is going to be hugely impactful for getting goods and services to the poorest people in the world. And that's in the morning, 8 a.m. here in Toronto. And in the evening, Yangbo Du of Innovo is going to talk about SDGs and net zero. And you're like, well, who is Yangbo Du and what's Innovo, SDGs and net zero? Well, if I click on this, it goes to the add event page. Yangbo is amazing. He's part of Sustainable Development New York. He has an incredible background in history. I met him through Regeneration Pollination, which is an amazing community to check out. So he's not necessarily with EA, but he does know a lot of great stuff. And he's going to talk about business to business buying and how that can lead to driving down scope emissions, scope 1 and 2, and then working through scope 3. So this has a lot to do with supply chain and logistics and how you actually make things happen with making change in the world. And Alex, how much time do I have left?
You have 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. All right. So real quick then, we'll just go over to these other ones. So that was supply chain logistics. Similarly, e-entrepreneurs, lots of systems and complexity related stuff there. If you're going to sell stuff, you need to figure out a lot of things, even if it doesn't have a real world implication, if it's just purely tech, you have to figure out a lot of things with, getting people to use your product, doing a lot of this sort of lean startup thing. So I also have a session there, which surprisingly, it's the same session. Look at that. It's the same thing, same people, but different sort of spin. They're going to be talking about both anyway. So, academic to entrepreneurs, I would hope a lot of academics should become entrepreneurs. It'd be great. Spencer Greenberg, I think, made the transition. That guy's amazing. And then mental health. So I also set up this EA mental health, and EA medicine is starting this thing with Happier Lives with Dr. Michael Plant, and that's on November 24th. And there's this whole systems and complexity thing there. There's literally a therapy called internal family systems. It's amazing. I don't know if Michael Plant's going to talk about it, but there's lots of amazing resources there. And then just to round things out, Complexity Weekend, a great organization outside of EA that runs these amazing weekends. They're once a month. They have 2 big events each year, one in November, one in May. The one in November was amazing. And there were people there like these people here, RJ Cordes, Kay Castani, this guy who is an amazing lawyer, Michaela M, who does biomimicry, Daniel, who's one of the world's foremost experts on ants, might be important for the insect word for people. This guy, Marco Garfield, who I'll get to next, actually works at the Santa Fe Institute and has a podcast. And I'll show you my amazing bio here, and I'll even read it out because I think it's pretty good. All right, so somewhere here. Yes, this is me. So business systems analyst, dare to be stupid. Alex is basically an idiot. He worked for Nortel and they went bankrupt. He worked in tier 1 automotive for a company that, you guessed it, went bankrupt. In the late 90s, he invested in promising companies such as Nortel, JD Uniphase, Ariba, and Commerce One. We all know how that ended. At least nothing has gone wrong since Alex started working in healthcare supply chain. During the weekend, Alex will challenge you to be natural instead of artificial, specific instead of general, and use stupidity instead of intelligence. So this basically isn't your normal into complexity and systems, dare to be stupid, do dumb things. And I'll leave you a couple more things. This is SI Network, which is a huge group. They have all kinds of things. Josh Colchester is setting up. They have groups kind of all across the world, and he's building more of them. Lots of things, materials, all parts of the world. Cape Town, Manila just had a big event, so on and so forth. Systems, like all kinds of things that are up the alley of the EA folks. I'm on the Toronto team with Narayan from here. And then finally, and this is the Michael Garfield and Emerson Spatz, have started this thing called Complexity in Crypto. And it's a crazy Discord server. Gotta love the name Discord. And the one I like the most is Blockchain as Biology, which to me seems like, yeah, that it's essentially crack. Crypto as applied complexity. So crypto, interesting, weird, and amazing, has a lot of implications for complexity. Also going to be a big important part of the EA story.
Yeah,
I think with that,
nice.
I'm probably out of time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Thanks for your talk. And yeah, I would encourage you to share all the links in the chat. Yeah, thank you. Our next speaker is Daniel Slavanka, and he's going to talk about the importance of writing and structuring your thinking, especially using tools like Obsidian. So you're welcome, Daniel. Okay, I need to allow you to share your screen.
Right. Not yet.
Okay.
But I can already start. Cool. Thank you. I'm going to share the screen. Doesn't matter. Cool. So hi guys. I guess you're seeing something? Yes, you are. I'm gonna talk about the importance of structuring your thinking. And it's not gonna be technical, not as technical as Alex talk. And I'm gonna repeat a message which you have certainly heard before. It's gonna be simply, guys, I mean, it helped me, so it might also help you as well. Just write stuff down, and a lot. So I'm gonna start with a question as an anchor, which is simply, have you ever, been on your bed at night trying to fall asleep and you had too many thoughts running in your head? Like, for instance, what the heck am I doing with my life? So just a simple case of rumination. And well, at least it happened to me. 5 years ago, I was finishing my studies and I didn't have too many plans about my future. And I was kind of applying randomly to many jobs. And at the same time, I was very hungry for knowledge. I was reading so many books, taking notes, and I had so many thoughts, which I was writing in my personal journals. But in some way, I was a bit overwhelmed, or I felt overwhelmed. And this story is an example of a bigger problem, which we all have somehow. It's simply that we have, or at least we suffer from, an information overload. Like, we think too much. We have too many thoughts per day. We read so much from books, podcasts, media, doesn't matter. And what we read, what we learn, doesn't get encoded into the long-term memory, most likely. And myself, I don't know about you, but I would like to spend the right amount of time thinking and learning. And I think too much, we learn too much, and do not act enough. So I would like to give you like a few tips for that. And yeah, some further arguments which convince me that writing and structuring your thinking is important is like the theory of cognitive development by Vygotsky. Pretty much, we know that babies, over time, they acquire language. So first, they mumble a few words, which turn into sentences. But the first sentences are what we call egocentric language, which means they're just self-talk. And many people who talk to themselves, I don't know, like one of your parents or so on, and we're like, oh, they're crazy. But then this egocentric language turns into inner speech, which means like part of it turns into inner speech, which means it just becomes your automatic thoughts, and the rest becomes what is called socialized language, which is what you usually do when you ask a question and answer. And that's why, when we look at people who talk to themselves, we're crazy, but we have this constant thoughts of constant stream of thoughts running in our head all day long. And that's why it's important to kind of stop it and just put it down and make an end to it. Another analogy is with how we work, right? So after my studies, I had a few jobs at different companies, and I realized the importance of knowledge management, right? We have to keep track of what we do. We have to kind of document our processes and make guides, just document the progress and so on. And I'm like, yeah, why don't I do it in my private life? Why am I so structured at work, but when it comes to my life, I'm like, yeah, doesn't matter. Somehow my brain is gonna remember it. But no, it's not that easy. And similarly, I was also inspired by an article I read about supposedly Amazon's memo culture. Jeff Bezos, according to this article at least, asks before every meeting, or at least many meetings, to everybody to read silently 6 pages, like a memo, which would simplify the discussion and get everybody on the same page right at the beginning of the meeting, right? And last but not least, something which I guess further convinced me that it's important to write, is just that, yeah, I'm pretty sure you had this experience, but when you look at your old writing, like, oh, I was not as smart as I thought, or at least you can compare. You can compare a snapshot of your past to who you are today, and that's how you can kind of have this narrative of progress in your life. Yeah. So back to my story. I am now still quite confused about my future, but at least I'm very explicit about it. And for instance, I created a memo about my career plan, which I shared with my friends, which I shared with member of some EA virtual group. And yeah, that's really helped to kind of get feedback and further progress. And where in the meanwhile, if I had kept this to myself, I would have been stuck for a longer time. And yeah, so pretty much this is my key messages. Those are my key messages for the talk. I'm gonna keep hammering the same message: write stuff down, and the clarity of your writing reflects the clarity of your thinking. I guess that makes sense. You don't have to be a good writer, have styles, but you have to be able to kind of structure your thinking. And there is an entrepreneur which I admire, who is Derek Sivers. He's also like arguing in favor of structuring your thoughts around themes, but you can also do it on paper. That doesn't matter. But if you want to do it, with IT tools, you can do it even more efficiently. And so there are tools which helps you distinguish between different types of information, right? So there are some information which you want to remember like forever. And we know the only way to remember things long term is to store it, I mean, to use like spaced time repetition. And that's why you need Anki cards. And otherwise, for something which you might need in the future, or you might want to read again in some days, there is, I mean, you can use docs, words, Google Sheets, whatever matter, but there's one tool which I want to show you afterwards quickly, which I found really interesting. It's called Obsidian, and there is another version which is called Rome, which allows you to kind of structure your thinking in a complex matter, in a complex way, right? And lastly, I mean, those are my categories, but there are stuff which you want to write and just forget. So just write it on a piece of paper or on a file which you call to delete it and forget about it. Right. So last but not least, this is how, I mean, what I use, which is called Obsidian, and I could do, I mean, people do 1 hour or 2 hour introduction on this tool because it's so complex. But what is allowed for, it's to kind of use backlinks to kind of go back and forth between themes and whatever, like notes. And you can even see your thinking visually, and you can see the complexity of your thinking, yeah, on that graph. And you can see that my graph has a quite tree-like structure. It means not that very much interconnected, but that means that I have nodes in my Obsidian, which I should kind of connect to make it a bit more complex, or complex-like. Yeah, so that was pretty much it. I'm gonna post some of the links on the chat if interested, like the Derek Siever's article and Obsidian and Anki cards. And yeah, thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, you still have 1 more minute, like if you want to explore something in more depth, or if you have some like additional comments. And of course, it would be helpful if you can share the like slides presentation with us.
Sure. I mean, I don't have much more to say. I mean, what I would advise you is to go on YouTube and just look at Obsidian on a live demo, because there are so many guys who are so enthusiastic about it. I mean, especially in the software engineering world. And yeah, like it's a quite powerful tool. And I'm gonna send you a link of somebody who's making a course or on how to structure your thinking according to him. But I'm rather kind of thinker. I'd rather create my own structure, because in the end it's your life. That's why I don't use a ABC planning or whatever. But yeah, so I advise you to have a look at it on YouTube. But other than this, I don't have any further message.
Yeah, it was great. Actually, I know that a lot of researchers in like the EA landscape are using different tools to structure that thinking, either like Obsidian or Rome research. So yeah, it's really nice that you covered all of that. Okay, so our next speaker is Alastair, who will be talking about felt sensing.
Thank you. So, good morning, good evening. My name is Alastair Faroukja, and yeah, I'll be talking about felt sensing. So this is a practice which it touches a bit on what Daniel was just talking about. You know, sometimes we have a problem with too many words, you know, which aren't helpful. And sometimes we have what seems like an opposite problem of no words at all. You know, we have something that we want to say and we don't have words for it. And felt sensing is, it's many things, but one thing that is about finding words or letting words come for something that we know, but for now we don't have words for it. And this is, you could say, a development of something that we do naturally. Like sometimes we have just one word that we know but we can't remember it. You know, it's on the tip of our tongue. And it would be great if we could remember it, but it just takes time and patience. And sometimes we don't remember it at all, but sometimes after a few minutes or sometime, we remember the word and we feel some relief. Oh yes, that's the word that I was that I wanted to think about, that I was thinking of, or that's the name that I was trying to remember. There's a sense of relief, you know, some aha moment. That's with just one word. But even if we're thinking about, if we're engaged in maybe some creative process, and we have something that we know we want to communicate, but we don't have words for it yet. Again, it's a process of, it takes time and patience, and people have looked into this process and found a way to do it more deliberately and teach people how to do it. And that's what they call felt sensing, or you might find it listed as focusing as well. Focusing not in the sense of intense concentration, but more like focusing others, because you look at something that is currently vague, and then slowly it comes into focus, it becomes clearer. So I've got a diagram which I would like to share. Yeah, which is just this diagram here. Are you seeing the green diagram with green blob over there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the we can think of the green area as something that we already know, and the white area is things that we don't know, or the green area is things that we have words for, the white area is things that we don't have words for, or even the comfort zone. The green area is things that we are comfortable with, the white area is things that we're not comfortable with. And felt sensing is about actually the edge between them, this fuzzy edge that you can see between the green and the white. Felt sensing is about hanging out, spending time at this fuzzy edge over here. Yeah, it wants to grow and develop. It doesn't really help to stick with things that we already know. And yet we can't just go 100 miles out into things that we have nothing at all about, things that we have no words at all for. What really helps is to spend some time gently, without judgment, without pressure, at the edge of what we know and what we don't know, what we can feel and what we don't really feel. Things that we're comfortable with, the edge between what we're comfortable with and what we're not comfortable with. That is where change, positive change and growth can come at that edge. Yeah, so let me see what else I want to say about this. Yeah, something that's so felt sensing is something that can be useful for processing our feelings and emotions. It can be useful for creative processes, whether it's writing a short note or writing a novel. It can be useful for dealing with stress and anxiety. People have used it for other purposes as well. And if there's one thing that I want to, that I'd like to take away, it's yeah, the importance of things that are fuzzy and ambiguous, and the value of yeah, that fuzzy, ambiguous border over there. And I want to make clear, our goal is not to be ambiguous. So if there's something that is already clear, then I don't want to make it ambiguous. But if there is something that is fuzzy and ambiguous, that's a sign that it's somewhere at the edge over there. It's a sign that there might be something valuable, a chance for growth. And that's something important to point out, because in our culture, we often dismiss or ignore things that are fuzzy and ambiguous. And focusing, felt sensing, teaches us to that there can be quite a lot of value over there if we give it time, if we're patient with it. Unfortunately, it's not a process that is predictable. You can't say, oh, I'm going to get these results in 1 hour or these results in 1 month. Yeah, spending time at that fuzzy edge, that over time it does prove helpful. And there's maybe another diagram I can share. So I'll stop sharing that and share. Where is it? Share screen. Yeah, so this is the iceberg diagram, where things that are clear and which we can articulate in words without problem, those are at the tip of the iceberg. That's things that we are completely conscious about. But besides all that, there's a huge, a much larger area of our life, which is unconscious or semi-conscious, which is below the surface. And it's very powerful, can be very helpful. And the border between those two, between the conscious and the unconscious, that is where we find, that's what we call the felt sense. And yeah, we show that diagram. Oops. Diagram. I'll just bring up the other diagram. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
you have 1 more minute, and yeah, in the end, maybe you might recommend some sources to dig deeper into this topic.
Yes. Yeah, so another way of describing focusing is felt sensing is the zigzag between going between the explicit and the implicit, between things that we know and things that we don't know. And yeah, so the last things I wanted to share is yes, this just some links. Where are they? Down over here. Yeah, so there's 2 websites, focusing.org and focusingresources.com, which might be useful. I'll put these in the chat. Also, the Center for Applied Rationality, one of the coaches specifically offers sessions in focusing or felt sensing. If you're going to search for this on Google, you could search for felt sensing, but it's much better to search for focusing and Gendlin. Gendlin is this the name of the guy who first developed this process. Just a couple of disclaimers: I'm not a psychologist, counselor, or therapist, and this is not psychotherapy. Although it is used by therapists, but I'm also a therapist myself. Yes, I'll stop here and put those links in the chat. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It was really interesting, and I know that this topic was covered on Less Wrong multiple times on different posts, and I know that a lot of people like from Rationality community found it extremely useful. So yeah, I encourage people to check it out and yeah, learn more about it. And we are ready to go to our next speaker, and next speaker is Daniel, who is going to talk about nuclear security. And yeah, are you ready, Daniel?
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm deeply grateful. Sincere appreciation to everyone who's spoken so far. It's been a huge delight getting insights and perspectives from regions of supply chains to field sensing to knowledge management. I think it's been very good. And to Alex, thank you very much for that question asked. Without any doubt, I think the issue of supply chain, ensuring nuclear security is very critical to pivoting global good. And I believe strongly that with the current efforts of the United Nations, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and other organizations currently doing work in that field, like the Nuclear Threat Initiative and the Wisconsin Project, we are going to achieve greater success. I'm really honored to be sharing insights and perspectives into the field of nuclear security. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day to you, wherever you're joining from across the world. And I hope that you'll be able to learn and join us in the solidarity in protecting the future of humanity. I'll begin by sharing a few tips about nuclear security, nuclear weapons, and nuclear risk. A nuclear weapon, which is also known as an atomic bomb or a nuclear bomb or a nuclear warhead, is an explosive device that derives a destructive force from nuclear reactions. What is nuclear security? Nuclear security simply aims to protect people, property, society, and of course the planet from harmful effects of nuclear activities. Then now, what is a nuclear risk? This is simply the possibility of the occurrence of a nuclear disaster. Unfortunately, somewhat like this occurred at the end of the Second World War. However, we are very glad that we haven't seen such occurrence thereafter. Notwithstanding, there are some key facts that I would like to bring to our attention as we pivot and navigate. Currently, there are 5 nuclear weapon states across the world. We have the United States of America, Russia, United Kingdom, China, and France. And I'm sure some of us may know there are all the countries who possess nuclear weapons or who have tested nuclear weapons, but may have not been officially recognized as nuclear weapon states. This ranges from India, Pakistan, North Korea, etc. It would amaze you to know that there are over 13,400 nuclear weapons in the world today. However, I think that's some progress based on the backlog which we had from the Second World War. It was reduced from more than 20,000 to 13,400. I think that's some huge progress made in that regard. In 1983, the first nuclear war was prevented by a Russian military officer, Stanislav Petrov, during the Cold War. That would have been an event that would prevent I myself from being in existence today, but I'm glad that Stanislav Petrov took that bold decision to not just deny, but also disobey the protocols of the order given to him at that moment. To interest you to know that China recently tested a hypersonic nuclear warhead. That is a nuclear weapon that moves at the speed of sound. That's some really backward progress on our quest for a better future for humanity. Nuclear weapons are really being proliferated across the world. And as we all know, several events occur which we may have not seen much information on, but I would like to emphasize on the case of atomic diplomacy. Nuclear weapon states today use the threat of nuclear weapons to promote their foreign policy. And this is a very huge risk that poses threat and danger to the future of humanity. Building upon all this that I've shared, there is one underlying reality. The detonation of a nuclear weapon puts hundreds of millions of people at the risk of death. Such risk which could eliminate millions of. I'm sincere apologies for that brief break. I had some issues with my internet connection. So I'll continue from where I stopped. Looking at the challenges of nuclear security, one of the major challenges we have today is that nukes are on hair trigger alert and ready to be launched. What does the hair trigger alert mean? It means that nuclear weapons are not separated from their systems. So system failure, cyber attack, or inaccurate intelligence could lead to the abrupt launch of a nuclear warhead, which poses a great danger to the future of humanity. I have discussed the issue of atomic diplomacy, when nations use the threat of nuclear weapons to promote their foreign policy. That is another challenge which we have. Thirdly, I would emphasize the issue of neglect. I'm glad that 80,000 hours make this one of the priority cases in the list of global pressing issues. The issue of nuclear security, it is very broad in scale. It is highly neglected. However, it is still tractable. There are low conversations about the topic, and there are minimal campaigns to educate the public about nuclear security. So today, many people do not know about what is going on within the realm of nuclear security. Without any doubt, there needs to be more effort in this area, ranging from increased funding and also capital building activities for young people in this field should be accelerated. Let me use this opportunity to mention that everyone can have a say in where the world goes to. The global catastrophic nuclear risk is going to be worse than COVID-19. We all experienced the shutdown due to COVID-19. Think about a more than double effect if there is a case of a nuclear war. We do not want to experience that. So how can we solve this problem? Young people should be encouraged to pursue the field. There should be increased conversations about the topic. We need increased funding. We need improved bilateral and multilateral relations amongst countries of the world. And we need improved governance of laws and treaties guiding against the proliferation, development, and use of nuclear weapons. I believe strongly that our sacrifice for the greater good can lead to a more beautiful future for humanity, void of nuclear disasters. How can you get involved? Yes, we do not have enough time, so I am really skimming through my presentation for today. There are so many ways to get involved. I'll be dropping some links in the chat. Beyond pursuing a career in nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, you can also donate to organizations working in the field. You can also support or lead global campaigns or local campaigns in this course area. There are so many organizations working in this field. We have from Rethink Media, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, we have the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, we have the Bulletin for Atomic Scientists, etc., etc. Talking about nuclear security and the risk of a nuclear disaster is not to instill fear in humanity. It is to raise our consciousness, our concern, and our curiosity about solving nuclear risk. Toby Ord wrote in his book, yes, beyond the precipice, we need to secure a more beautiful future for humanity. We have highlighted this issue of nuclear security, and there are other issues posed by biological weapons, artificial intelligence, etc. But I think the onus rests on me and you to keep on doing work in this beautiful area so that we can create a better future. According to the Nuclear Threat Initiative, if we estimate a 0.5% chance of a global catastrophic nuclear event occurring in any given year, by the end of the century, the probability is 40%. If we can make a global catastrophic nuclear event 100 times less likely, the probability this century drops to 0.5%. Now more than ever, we need a new nuclear paradigm for surviving the Anthropocene. The time is now to safeguard our future. I hope that I've been able to share deep insights into this field and what you can do as someone interested or someone who cares about the future of humanity. Thank you very much. It's my utmost delight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. And thanks for the links you shared. Yeah, I just want to mention that Daniel is someone who is pursuing a career in nuclear security, so probably you can reach him if you have more questions, or yeah, if you want to learn more. And I see some questions in the chat, and probably yeah, Daniel, you can answer them if you have some more time later. And yeah, and we are moving on, and our next speaker is Sami Mubarak, who is going to give a talk all on children's rights. Sami, are you ready? Okay, nice.
Yeah, I am. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'll start. Hi, everyone. Today I'll be talking about children's rights. I started reading about this topic a few months ago, and I spent 5 to 10 hours into it. And I think my opinion is correct. I'm not going to do the whole joke. Okay. So my thesis would be that we should re-examine our treatments of legal minors, that differences between how we deal and treat with adults and children should come with strong justification, and the current status quo doesn't come with much justification. It's the status quo. So yeah, we generally believe that we shouldn't coerce people into doing stuff, especially under the threat of violence. But in many places around the world, children can be beaten, locked up, and even married off. But even in the best countries, whatever, they have like no control over where they live, what they eat, where they sleep, when they sleep, how to spend their free time, which deity to worship, if they have a choice over worshiping or not. Almost all their belongings are dependent on the grace of their parents and can be taken without their consent, even if they acquired them, by themselves. In cases of unusual abuse, reporting that abuse will either get them into the foster care system, where people who legally are their new parents, I think maybe it's a bit different, I don't know, are deciding their fates. And if they're good, they're good. If they're not, sucks. Or there'll be some kind of investigation, and then they will go back to their parents, who are not the best, and they will deal with their age. Some of these violations are endorsed legally, some are culturally endorsed. Children are to remain obedient to their parents and their parental figures at all times, and they can be subjected to cruel punishments at their behest, including corporal punishment, which is hitting, public shaming, and casual confiscation of property. So with that, this is an example. Okay, this is a YouTube link. I think it's the right one. If it's not, okay. So in this one, a 15-year-old complained about her parents on her private Facebook, and about how much course she has to do or something, and her parents somehow found out, and so her father decided to read her complaint/letter online, and then bring her laptop, which she owns, and then literally shoot it with a giant gun. And in any other kind of relationship, this would not be either legally or socially acceptable, but most of the comments on YouTube were unfortunately positive. Here's a quote from Samantha Goodwin, and she has an excellent paper on the topic that I'll be linking at the end. Children as citizens enjoy fewer rights in relation to the state, both in their diminished capacity to participate through voting or running for election, and in diminished protections from state coercive force. They are both subjected to regulations similar to the regulation of suspects and convicts, but they also have fewer due process rights with which to defend themselves. Secondly, children as human beings are subject to expensive, arbitrary whims of other private citizens, primarily their parents. So the argument that group X lacks some capacity or capacities Y, and that this is a reason enough for relegating them to second-class citizenship has been used in the past to deny rights to women and racial minorities. Assuming we reject this argument in these cases, we should reject it now, or at least highly doubt it. Again, Samantha Gibbon, the mindset that those with relative social power and status are historically not reliable judges of the interests, capabilities, or needs of socially marginalized and oppressed people when it comes to altering the social hierarchy. There are specific, identifiable, relevant differences between most adults and most children that impact their ability to competently exercise rights. The law ought to discriminate, if at all, on the basis of those identifiable relevant differences, rather than employing age as a proxy. For example, driving underage, normally 16, is illegal because age is taken to be a proxy for driving ability, but this proxy is unnecessary because we have driving tests. And so if the reason for the discrimination based on driving ability is to deter people who can drive from driving, the driving test does apply that, supply that, and we don't have to add another kind of discrimination based on age, assuming that driving test is sufficient or whatever. But another example would be corporal punishment, which is legally permissible against children in many countries, but illegal and considered, assault or whatever against adults. And it cannot be justified according to any meaningful distinction between adults and children, because it advances no compelling public interests and only serves to oppress children, unless you count obeying parents as public interest. Okay, so yeah, another thing. Okay, so children, at least toddlers and above, but maybe babies in their own ways have preferences and they can express them, and they can understand many of the consequences of their actions. And adults, on the other hand, are very irrational. They smoke, believe in ghosts and conspiracy theories. They don't exercise enough or save enough money for retirement. And most disturbingly, 2 blocks in Newcomb's problem. Yet we still give them the full right to self-determination that we don't give to children based on their diminished capacities. Unless you think we shouldn't and we should have like a philosopher king ruling us, but that's outside the scope of this talk. Cool. Okay, so some counterarguments. One would be that everyone goes through this particular type of oppression. A counterargument would be that under some views of personhood, oppressing, enslaving, or reducing to legal inferiors, everyone for 20% of their lives is very similar to oppressing 20% of all people. And secondly, if we subject all people to a certain arbitrary punishment, such as cutting off the toes of everyone, that doesn't really make it good, because it's worse than if you did it to some people. Well, there could be fairness considerations, but I think toe cutting kind of overrides that. Cool. Another counterargument would be that the status quo is for the good of children or the good of society at large. And as I said, this argument has been used, and still in some parts of the world I don't want to mention, to restrict the rights of women and minorities. Okay, for example, in my own country, Saudi Arabia, I have encountered many people who think not allowing women to leave their homes is good for them because it sometimes sucks to leave their home for work or entertainment. And it was also used by people defending slavery, which is bad. For example, John Calhoun, the 7th Vice President of the United States, wrote that, quote, "The African slave kindly treated by his master and mistress and looked after in his old age is better off than the free laborers of Europe." Yeah, there's another quote, but I'm gonna skip that. Yeah, again, from the Goodwin paper, paternalistic appeal to the best interests of legal subordinates in order to justify the subordination is not unique to children. And whatever differences may exist between whites and blacks, or between men and women, we find these paternalistic arguments repulsive, not merely because we disagree as an empirical matter, that slavery and coverture, this is when married men become owners of their wives or something, were in the best interests of Black people and married women, respectively, but because we recognize that equality under the law and civil liberties are intrinsically valuable to people.
So you're running out of time. Do you have some like final notes?
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple more arguments, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the sources. But yeah, my final thoughts would be that I doubt this will change, but I hope it does. Reason to be skeptical is that most people lose the selfish incentive to advocate for change once they reach 18. But there's others who still do that. We can't do much about it, except hopefully support policies that give children more agency, reform institutions such as the foster care system, and fund organizations or people that work on youth rights. We can also treat the children in our lives better and advocate on their behalf when appropriate. And given that most of adults will become parents, we can try and become more aware of the power differential and adjust our relationship accordingly. Yeah, thanks. I will link some sources down.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Thank you for your talk. And we still have 3 more talks left. And yeah, hope you will be with us till the end. And yeah, so the next talk will be given by Joseph, and he will talk about social institutions and institutional design. And after him, we will have 2 more talks, one on like philosophy and ideological inclusivity in EA movement, and another one about the good ancestor and why you should read this book. So yeah, I think yeah, Joseph, are you ready?
Yeah, and sorry for looking like I am trying to stay anonymous. It's just the only light in this room is behind me. So I am backlit. I am going to share my screen if I can, which I can. Maybe, yes, okay. And as you can also see, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Great. As you can also see by my use of the default PowerPoint font and format, I have not made beautiful slides in Beamer like Daniel Slavanka did. This is just me copy pasting a lot of stuff into PowerPoint. I am going to talk about institutional longevity and the long-term future. This research project is really an excuse for me to do a lot of historical geeky research and hide it under long-termist umbrellas. Basically, the question is, long-termists want to affect the long-term future, and something that tends to last a very long time are institutions, defined very broadly. So how long do institutions last? What kind of institutions last longer, shorter? What kind of criteria can be built into that? And I got my hands on a lot of cool historical data and did some analysis on this. So there we go. Yeah, so I mean, institutions mean a lot of things. I've been using tools in this research from a field of statistics called survival analysis, which is most commonly used in the medical field. A common use case is for a patient with X condition, how long on average will they survive? And you can just use a lot of data. Also used for, certain engineering tools, like how long will a ball bearing in this machine last before it gives out, and so forth. For long-termism, we care about a lot of different levels of institutions. The motivating example for this, the thing that actually spurred me on to do this research, is something called the Patient Philanthropy Fund, put out by Founders Pledge, and based on the research of a guy named Phil at Oxford's Global Priorities Institute. And their idea is, let's put a lot of money, invest in some stuff, put it, and then hide it under a bed and forget about it for 20, 50, 100, 1,000 years. So long-termists have access to a large pool of capital in the long term when there is a need for it. And when you do something like that, a big question is, will that money still be there when you need to go get it? Also, if that money is still there, will the people or entities who want to use it have similar goals as we do? So that the institutions that a pot of money like that relies on are banks, banking systems, countries that enforce banking laws, the people or lawyers or what have you that decide where to spend that money. And if you're trying to plan decades, centuries, millennia ahead, some of those things may look a lot different than when you end up there. So some of this research has been done before. Economists do it with firms, with companies. How long on average does a company last before it goes bankrupt, merges, disappears? Historians do it, have done similar analysis with countries or empires. And there's some vague stuff like world systems, ideologies. What I'm interested in is this kind of middle ground, and what I've worked on in this project of nonprofit, non-sovereign institutions like universities, religions, monasteries. Some of these institutions are defined really well, some aren't. And they have different relevance to long-termists who want to go and do, who want to influence the far future through an institution, build an institution that will last across the far future. So this is just one example of my research, just a tiny little bit of math, but the graph is also kind of self-explanatory. Each dot here is an empire from a data set by a guy named Taj Pera. And on the y-axis, you have the fraction surviving, and the x-axis is how long they live. So 0 here, 10 to the 0, 1 is technically the first year that empire exists, and then how long does that empire survive? When you have a data set like this, you can estimate the lifespan and the rate at which institutions die. Technically, it's the second derivative here. It's do institutions die at a constant rate, or like say 1/10 of every empire dies every year. It's a very high number, but is that rate constant across the lifespan of empires, or is it increasing? Do older institutions die more than younger institutions, or is it decreasing? Do younger institutions die more than older institutions? We call the first case, aging. So if it was the case that, a lot of, on average, empires died at a rate of 1 out of 50 for the first 100 years of their existence, but the empires that live to get to the 100 years then last forever. Those empires are called aging. The alternative, I don't really have a good term for it. I call it child mortality. Empires tend to die out younger than older. So for empires, see the average lifespan, median actually is 347, and it has very slight and not statistically significant child mortality. So that's that 0.92. If it was 1, it would be constant rate of death. So the two institutions that I think are most relevant to EA and also have not been really written up or researched are universities and monasteries. All the data in the next few slides are from a great guy named Max. He put together this data set. He's a German guy, Max Nagele. certain I'm pronouncing his last name wrong. He put together this data with a grant from the Long-Term Future Fund or something like that, collecting pretty much birth dates and death dates for all European universities that you could find, and a giant chunk of Christian, I think Benedictine. There's like 3 different sects of Christian monasteries in Europe. I forget the exact. And the reason I think these 2 examples are particularly relevant is universities and monasteries both have pretty specific ideologies, and they both exist with a intent to last a long time. Universities, the ideology is just pass on knowledge, keep teaching, however honorable you want to portray that. And monasteries, a lot more specifically, have specific founding ideologies. And the founders, the people who go into these institutions and design them, generally have the goal of making them last a long time. I think the same can be said for a lot of companies, a lot of empires, but there are also a lot more short-term concerns with countries, companies, firms, empires. And I think universities are very much, and monasteries are focused on the long term. So this is, again, just the findings. I'll explain this really quick. Universities are significantly child mortality. So a lot of universities are founded just to die pretty early on. This data set, I count merging of universities as a death of whatever university gets absorbed. And that happened a lot in Europe. So there's a lot of consolidation. This is barely statistically significant. I mean, if and when I put this in a paper, I'm not going to make a lot of this finding. And again, I'll just say this is all very preliminary. It's not, that this analysis will probably change, especially if I do try to get this published. But universities do tend to last a long time. When they make it past that first, there's a result which is not on this slide. If universities make it to 100 years, they age really well. They last a long time. That's, again, these are mostly European universities with some Middle Eastern and Turkish universities as well. And that's pretty interesting, but it's also a fact that things quieted down a lot ideologically after the 17th century in Europe. So there was a lot less, during the 30 Years' War, a lot of Catholic universities were burned by Protestants and vice versa, and so forth. Monasteries. Monasteries is really cool, very relevant. I think that it's a super interesting topic. I would love to get more wider and broader data. But a lot of, monasteries actually are a wealth of data because monks at the time were some of the few people who could write, and they really liked to write, so they wrote down a lot. And monasteries very specifically had an ideology, and the goal was to keep that up for a very long time. And that ideology was remarkably stable. There's some of my favorite papers in the corporate governance literature are about the corporate governance of Benedictine monasteries, and how such a distributed architecture could really keep passing on stable values and stable ideas at a time when communication was very slow. Monasteries last a really long time. Like the median age was over 1,000 years. The curves here are weird because of something called censoring, which is that a lot of monasteries are still alive. So I had to kind of cut those out because I can't just assume they died this year, because they're not all going to die this year. So that would kind of skew the results. They also age really well. Monasteries, their mortality rate goes down as they get older. So it's a really interesting case. The next step in this, which is a lot more qualitative, is what is the context in which monasteries and universities thrive? The cases where monasteries die are much more often because their resources are expropriated, which is a nice way for saying that someone comes by and burns them down and steals all their gold and all that. So an important finding here is that there have to be external institutions which guarantee the importance, the wealth, the continuation of the ingoing institutions. That is the last slide I have. Yes, just saw Alex's note in the chat. Yeah, 336 is very close to these data. I'm just using this one Taj-Pero data. There are 2 or 3 other data sets, all of us put in that 300-ish range. Last fun statistic I'll throw out on that, on empires is that same for universities. If an empire gets to 100 years, it lasts for like more than half a millennia. It's in the 500s, but a lot, again, don't get to 100 years. Anyway, that's all my slides. How do I stop sharing? There you go. Thank you all for listening to me. And yeah, thanks Alex for organizing.
Yeah, thanks. Amazing. I think your presentation was really well prepared. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I would be happy to hear like more about this topic, like without this kind of time constraints. Like we can run separate events. Like I would be happy to help with that. Yeah, and we are ready to move on. And our next speaker is Kendria, and you're warmly welcome. Okay, I should.
Yeah, I'd like to share my screen.
Yeah. Okay, you can do it now. Okay, have you found how to do it?
No, my Zoom's not responding. Okay, it's getting better now.
Okay, we can see something.
Good.
But
my Zoom interface is really sketchy right now. Okay.
But it's
well, as long as you can see it, we're good.
It's not looking like right, like
okay.
Like a presentation.
Completely fine until this second. All right. Thanks for your patience.
No worries.
How's that?
It's still looking like a mostly like a black screen with something gray, so it's not
interesting.
Yeah, maybe you should try to share like the whole screen or an individual app. I don't know.
Okay, you know what? I'll just talk without slides. Okay, how about the other? How about Alex? You could go first, and then I can fix it. Would you like to go first, Alex?
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry about
I can go first, and I can try to fix the screen sharing. And yeah, actually my talk was supposed to be the last one, but I would be happy to share it right now. Okay, I need to set up a timer as usual. And I wanted to talk about a book by Roman Krasznarik. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce it correctly. So he's an Australian philosopher who wrote a book about long-term thinking, and it was like released earlier this year. I think like in the beginning of this year, but I think it's still not very common or popular within the EA landscape. And right now I'm writing a summary of this book, and I just tried. I want to highlight several things that caught me and that I found really interesting, and I want to talk about why you should read this book. Yeah, as I said, this book was released very recently, but it's already translated to more than 10 languages. And actually, like Roman Krasnarik is not a member of like A movement, so I think he's familiar with some of the like with works of, for example, Tobert or other long-termism, like other philosophers that are exploring long-termism and X risks, like Nick Bostrom or Tobert, and actually he mentioned some of them in the book, but he offers a kind of unique approach, a different kind of angle on the long-term thinking, because when you read about long-termism from EA sources, it's usually focused on the case for long-termism, why it's important, and it's very focused on existential risks. But Roman Krasnarik, like he creates a different kind of perspective as a person, like from the outside of EA movement. But I think he's done a really good job at promoting long-term thinking and ways to like actually he explores topics like how to behave with long-term thinking in mind, how we can be better ancestors, how we can switch from short-term thinking to long-term thinking. So things like that. And yeah, I really appreciated a lot of stories and examples, especially some historical cases that he covered in the book, because I think it's very important to use this kind of like case studies, as Joseph shared with us in the previous talk. And it's also very important to use storytelling to actually like promote different narratives. And that's something that Daniel mentioned about Stanislav Petrov. Like we can talk about nuclear security like as a very important issue like for hours, but when we have this clear example of Stanislav Petrov and how he made like the difference, how we might be close to a nuclear disaster in the past, and yeah, so it actually it is like with the storytelling, it can be much more relatable when you have this kind of stories, and that's what Roman Krasnarik is doing with his book. He's offering a lot of like stories and successful stories and not very successful stories about how humans can cooperate and work on long-term causes. And yeah, here on the slide you can see his something that he called the tug of war for time. Like, you know, when you are playing some video game, like strategy video game, and you have tug of war. So I mean, some of like part of the map is hidden from you, and you can't see in the distance. And he's speaking like the he's providing the same kind of metaphor for like long-term and short-term thinking, and he provides different solutions how we can fight these like drivers of short-termism, for example, political presentism, and like the fact that because like the system works in a way that actually encourage politicians to focus on short-term causes, because the election cycle is short, like 4 years, for example, and like how we can actually switch for more like long-term thinking in politics. And yeah, it's only one example. And also the thing that I really like in the book is that he covers a lot of cultural things and like art projects, and that's something that I still feel like EA community is still lack of, because art can be very engaging and very good way to promote ideas. And I was really surprised to find how many artists actually are working in this like field, creating art that is connected to this kind of legacy, creating legacy for like how we can be a better ancestor and so on. So yeah, it was really inspiring for me, and several concepts that I really liked from the book, and I want to share with you. So one concept is cathedral thinking. You can find even the whole web. There is a whole website that is covering cathedral thinking as a concept, and like this concept, it comes from the like from construction of from like long-term constructions that were built over like centuries, like Ulm Church in Germany. So the first, as example, like first stone was like laid in 14th century, and it was finished only 500 years later. And amazing things that is that like local residents, they not only like funded the constructions of this building, but they also they were not hoping to see like the building, the church within their lifetime. They were like funding and like helping with the construction to create a legacy for future generations, and they wanted actually like to share something with future generations. And there are a lot of examples, as Roman Krumnarik provides them in the book. Plenty of examples when similar mindset was used in space exploration or urban planning, and even smallpox eradication program is a kind of like a similar thing that can be seen as a cathedral thinking. Another concept is deep time humility, and it is connected like to the like deep time reckoning, that we can the fact that we can connect to the longer time frames. So for now, a lot of people actually are living in a very short term time frames. For example, if you just like watch the news, and some like tweet that was published by Donald Trump can be like media story for a couple of days. So we are very narrowly like we have very narrow focus on things that are happening right now, and that will not affect long-term future at all. And that is like and because of that, we just don't have enough like attention span to focus on more long-term things. So and he offers plenty of ideas how we can think in a more like longer time frames. So yeah, I'm running out of time. I don't want to take more of your time, but really, that's a really inspiring book, and I encourage either to read the book or to read a summary at least. Yeah, and I would be happy to answer your questions in the comments if you in a chat if you have some questions about the book. And yeah, probably I'll stop sharing. Okay, Kendra, how it's going? Have you managed to solve the problem?
I believe so. I changed my desktop manager. Could you please re-enable screen sharing?
You should be able to screen share right now. Okay. Okay, maybe you logged in, so like rejoined. Let's. Okay.
How's that?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Great. Okay, here we go. Effective altruists are not the first ones in history to care about doing good effectively. And I think it would be a shame if EA was artificially restricted to a certain kind of person with a certain philosophical background, instead of including everyone trying to do better across space and time. I argue that EA should not just use analytic philosophy born in Oxford and Cambridge and the Ivies, but instead philosophy from people around the world, weaving ourselves into a global history of thoughtful altruists. This would help us to build good ideas in the movement and also discourage racism. So what happens if we don't engage with non-Western philosophies? Well, if you only read literature from EAs and rationalists, you might not even realize that non-Westerners have had good ideas. I'm going to pick on Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality here, since I just read it, but I could draw from lots of examples. It is a beloved fan fiction by Eliezer Yudkowsky that explains many core concepts of the rationality community. And it's great, but it does fail pretty hard at inclusivity. The main character, Harry, mentions a lot of philosophers and scientists who he respects, maybe dozens of them, but I don't recall a single positive mention of an intellectual who is not a white man. Harry is proud that his European Enlightenment culture taught him to think clearly, but he doesn't seem to realize that other cultures could do the same. So what's wrong with this? It implies that only white people have had ideas that are relevant to thinking rationally and helping all sentient beings, which should immediately be absurd because these are central human projects that everyone has been thinking about for a long time. To paraphrase Jay Garfield, a favorite professor of mine, he says that to ignore all the philosophy of East Asia, Africa, India, the indigenous Americas, is to convey the impression that it is of less value than the philosophy produced in European culture, or even that no cultural could even do philosophical thought. And these are racist views. Even if we don't say this explicitly, if we don't counteract these views, then white supremacists could feel at home in effective altruism, and we don't want that. How about if we considered effective altruism to be a Western philosophical movement? Well, that could work, except that it's just not true. As we can see in this group, effective altruists come from around the world, and we need to make it clear that we accept EAs equally, no matter their philosophical background. Everyone can contribute. And also, effective altruists act globally. So as this movement gets more powerful in more countries, we had better listen to everyone whose lives we affect. A more positive reason to build dialogue with non-Western philosophies and include non-Western philosophers in EA is that this dialogue could help us all build good ideas. So when I think good idea, I first think of like a eureka moment, sudden new knowledge. But this isn't the only type of good idea. Studying other philosophies can help us reframe our own views. For example, studying the relationship between wisdom and compassion in Tibetan Buddhism has helped me to flesh out my goal to be intelligent and kind, with each aspect strengthening the other without compromise in a positive feedback loop. This kind of robust self-concept is very valuable to effective altruists trying to keep both of these aspects strong. Also, cross-referencing beliefs between traditions can reveal assumptions that we wrongly took for granted. Euro-American philosophers do their work in the context of Judeo-Christian religion, and this religion teaches that each human has an immortal soul. So even secular Western philosophers will naturally assume that the mind is unitary. This has limited European understanding of a complex mind with various subroutines and so on. And Alex, in his last talk, just mentioned deep time humility and how European scientists were surprised by how old the Earth really is because it contradicted the Christian Bible. But South Asian philosophers are very familiar with the concept of extremely long timescales. I saw that people were looking in the chat were wondering about long-termist art. I bet that if you looked in like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, there's probably some really cool long-term art in those traditions. Also, my favorite type of good idea that we can build through dialogue with other traditions is the good idea that enriches our philosophical foundation. I have this mental image of EA being a little cluster over here that has roots in all these other places. It has roots in Western philosophy and roots in, African, South American. I just really like the idea of these roots because they have these connotations of stability and richness, and can have multidimensional philosophies to help us better respond to new ideas and criticism, and help us avoid like whiplash from updating our beliefs so quickly based on new evidence. We would be a more grounded and solid, respectable philosophical movement if we were connected to philosophies throughout space and time. Okay, how do we go about this? Here's yet another Buddhism example, because that's what I'm familiar with, and another Harry Potter example. In the Methods of Rationality chapter on the nature of reality, Harry says that, quote, the Buddhists are wrong before launching into his own investigation. But actually, his thoughts come strikingly close to the Tibetan Buddhist perspective on the nature of reality. So, by dismissing an entire tradition with lifetimes of work and many universities and millennia of debates, Harry is missing out on what could have been such a cool conversation. The lesson here is to listen patiently. Don't dismiss an idea if it doesn't immediately sound correct. We do have to work across these cultural differences, and that'll take some effort. The philosopher of Chinese thought, Brian Van Norden, is frustrated, quote, with those who treat Chinese philosophy as nothing but contextless koans or fortune cookie platitudes. Reading philosophy requires an effort to think about the text holistically, constructively, and charitably. We are used to doing this with Western texts that we identify as philosophical. Like something that Will MacAskill says, we might think is weird right away, but we will hear him out because we respect him. We should offer that same respect to people who aren't at Oxford. One more thing on this slide. We should notice that different philosophical traditions have different strengths, which also should make a lot of sense. It would be a huge coincidence if philosophies had developed at equal rates. So Buddhists, for example, have millennia of experience observing the mind. The Buddhist philosophy of mind is highly applicable to research in, say, subjective well-being and changing mental patterns. While the British American analytic philosophy has developed theories of logic that are relevant to AI safety research. In conclusion, the false belief in the unique relevance of Enlightenment culture to effective altruism is limiting our ideas and inadvertently supporting a thesis of white supremacy. We don't have time for this. We are living with novel, powerful technologies that put us in unprecedented territory as a species, and humans are as vulnerable to dumb things like racism as we've ever been. And we need to draw on as many philosophical resources as possible to make it through. Thank you.
Thanks, Kendra. Very inspiring talk. Like, can't agree more with you on everything you said. Yeah, it was amazing, and thanks for staying with us, everyone. And I think that's it for today. Probably I want to give a bit more time to Kendra to share the links in the chat so everyone can see it. and yeah, probably I will